If you get emotional every time life pushes you, life controls you, and life will push you. It will test your patience in traffic. It will test your pride in conversations. It will test your confidence in silence. It will test your strength when things don't go your way. A single message, a single comment, a single look from someone you care about, and suddenly your mood shifts. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts spiral. Now your entire day is different. That's how subtle it is. That's how power slips away. Most people think strength means reacting fast, speaking up, defending yourself, proving a point, winning the moment. But real strength is quieter than that. Real strength is when you feel everything and still choose not to be controlled by it. Being unbothered doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're cold. And it doesn't mean you're passive. It means your inner state is no longer at the mercy of external events. That is power. Because here's the truth. Life will not stop testing you. People will misunderstand you. Plans will fall apart. Someone will disrespect you. Something will not go the way you expected. The question is not whether you will be tested. The question is, will you stay centered when you are? In this audiobook, we are not going to teach you how to avoid pressure. We are not going to promise a life without conflict, and we are definitely not going to encourage you to suppress your emotions. Instead, we are going to train something far more valuable. We are going to train your response. Over the next 90 minutes, you will learn how to create space between stimulus and reaction, how to stop taking everything personally, now how to detach without disconnecting, how to protect your energy like a leader, and how to become the calmest person in the room, even when the room is chaotic. This is not about becoming numb. It is about becoming stable. There is a difference. Numbness shuts down feeling. Stability holds feeling without losing direction. Most people live in reaction mode. They are triggered by notifications, by opinions, by delays, by inconveniences. Their mood is determined by what happens around them. If someone praises them, they rise. If someone criticizes them, they fall. If something goes wrong, they panic. If something goes right, they relax. Their emotional state is constantly negotiated by the outside world, and that is exhausting. When you learn to stay unbothered, something shifts. You stop chasing validation. You stop defending every comment. You stop explaining yourself to people who already decided what they believe. You stop arguing just to protect your ego, and you begin to conserve your energy. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to observe instead of absorb. That is when clarity grows. Because when you are no longer flooded by emotional noise, you can actually think. You can actually choose. You can actually act with intention instead of impulse. Staying unbothered is not about winning arguments. It's about winning your mind back. It's about realizing that not everything deserves your attention. Not every comment deserves your explanation. Not every situation deserves your emotion. Some things deserve your silence. Some moments deserve your pause. And some people deserve your distance. You will still feel anger. You will still feel disappointment. You will still feel frustration. You are human. But you will no longer let those feelings dictate your behavior. That is the difference between maturity and impulse, between leadership and chaos, between power and weakness. Throughout this journey, each chapter will challenge a common emotional habit that keeps you reactive. We will examine the need to be understood, the urge to defend yourself, the addiction to closure, the discomfort of silence, the fear of being judged, and one by one we will dismantle them, not through hype, through awareness, through discipline, through practice. Because calm is not a personality trait, it is a trained response. And when you train it long enough, something powerful happens. You walk into a room, and you are not scanning for approval. You hear criticism, and you are not instantly defensive. You face uncertainty, and you are not mentally collapsing. You remain steady. That steadiness becomes your edge. In a loud world, the calm person stands out. In emotional chaos, the grounded person leads. In moments of tension, the unbothered person sees clearly. That can be you, but only if you decide that your internal world matters more than external noise. Only if you decide that your peace is not for sale. Only if you decide that not every test deserves your reaction. This is your training, not to be cold, not to be distant, but to be in control. So take a breath. Slow down your thoughts and prepare to learn how to stay unbothered, even when life tries its hardest to move you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop taking everything personally. Someone doesn't reply to your message. Your mind fills in the gap. They're ignoring me. They don't respect me. I said something wrong. And just like that, a simple delay becomes a story becomes emotion becomes reaction. This is where most emotional instability begins. Not in what happens, but in the meaning we attach to what happens. Taking things personally is automatic. It feels natural. The brain is wired to interpret events in relation to the self. It constantly asks, "What does this mean about me?" But here is a deeper truth. Most of what people say and do has very little to do with you. It has to do with their mood, their stress, their insecurities, their upbringing, their unresolved pain. Yet when we personalize their behavior, we internalize their chaos. And that is the beginning of losing control. Imagine this. 2 co-workers receive the same criticism from their manager. The first thinks, "He thinks I'm incompetent." The second thinks, "He's under pressure. Let me extract what's useful." Same words, different interpretation, different emotional outcome. The first goes home frustrated, replaying the conversation all night. The second adjusts, improves, and moves on. The difference wasn't intelligence. It was emotional distance. When you take everything personally, you hand other people control over your internal state. A random comment can shift your mood. A small misunderstanding can ruin your day. A stranger's opinion can trigger doubt. And life becomes a series of emotional negotiations. But when you stop personalizing everything, something powerful happens. You observe instead of absorb. You begin to realize that someone's tone is about their day, not your worth. Someone's disagreement is about perspective, not rejection. Someone's silence is about their priorities, not your value. This shift does not happen overnight. It requires conscious awareness. Here is a practical exercise. The next time you feel triggered, pause and ask yourself, what else could this mean? Force your mind to generate at least 3 alternative explanations that have nothing to do with you. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe they're distracted. This simple mental habit weakens emotional impulsiveness. It inserts logic where ego usually dominates. Because most emotional reactions are ego-based. The ego wants validation. The ego wants to be right. The ego wants to be seen. The ego wants to be respected. And when it doesn't get those things, it reacts. But maturity begins when you realize something uncomfortable. Not everything requires your defense. Not everything requires your explanation. Not everything requires your emotion. There is strength in selective engagement. A calm person does not respond to every invitation to react. Let's go deeper. Why do we take things personally in the first place? At its core, it's about identity. When someone criticizes your idea, you hear criticism of your intelligence. When someone questions your decision, you hear doubt about your capability. When someone ignores you, you hear rejection of your presence. You merge action with identity. And when identity feels threatened, emotion spikes. To stay unbothered, you must separate behavior from self-worth. You are not your last mistake. You are not someone's opinion. You are not defined by one moment. When you understand this intellectually and emotionally, reactions soften. There is a story about a senior executive who rarely reacted in meetings, even when challenged aggressively. One day, a junior employee asked him how he stayed so composed. He answered simply, "If I reacted to every tone in this room, I would never make decisions. I listen for information, not emotion." That's the difference. He filtered signal from noise. When someone raised their voice, he didn't interpret it as disrespect. He interpreted it as intensity. When someone criticized a plan, he didn't hear attack. He heard data. He separated content from ego. That separation is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained. Start small. If someone cuts you off in traffic, and instead of thinking, "They disrespected me," think, "They're in a hurry." If someone doesn't invite you, instead of thinking, "They excluded me," think, "It wasn't about me." Will this always be true? Not necessarily. But here's the important part. Even if it is about you, reacting emotionally rarely improves the situation. It only transfers instability from them to you. Staying unbothered is not about being naive. It's about being strategic with your emotional energy. Every time you choose not to personalize something, you conserve strength. You keep your nervous system steady. You maintain clarity. And clarity is power. Chapter 2. Build the space between feeling and reaction. There is a moment, small, almost invisible, between what happens and how you respond. Most people never notice it. Someone says something sharp. Your chest tightens. Words rise to your mouth, and before you think, you react. That entire process can happen in less than a second. But inside that second is your power. When you don't control that space, your reactions are automatic, instinctive, emotional, and often regrettable. When you train that space, your responses become deliberate, calm, strategic. The difference between reacting and responding is time. Reaction is immediate. Response is intentional. And the ability to create even a few seconds of space between emotion and action can change the direction of your life. Think about the last time you regretted something you said. Chances are it wasn't planned. It was triggered. An argument escalated. A tone felt disrespectful. An assumption felt unfair. So you fired back. Maybe you raised your voice. Maybe you sent a message you later wished you hadn't. Maybe you shut down completely. All because there was no pause. The nervous system is designed for survival, not for leadership. When it perceives threat, even social threat, it prepares you to defend yourself. Heart rate increases. Muscles tense. Thoughts narrow. In that state, you're not thinking clearly. You are reacting. To stay unbothered, you must retrain this pattern. You must teach your mind and body that not every emotional surge requires immediate action. Start with this simple rule: the 3-second pause. When triggered, do nothing for 3 seconds. No speaking, no texting, no visible reaction. Just breathe. Inhale slowly. Exhale slowly. Those 3 seconds interrupt the automatic cycle. They signal to your nervous system that you are safe, that you are choosing. It sounds simple, but it is powerful. Because once you pause, you gain access to a new question. What outcome do I want here? Not how do I defend myself? Not how do I win? Not how do I prove them wrong? But what outcome serves me best? That shift changes everything. Imagine a heated meeting at work. Someone challenges your idea in front of others. Your ego wants to snap back. Your pride wants to correct them immediately. But instead of reacting, you pause. You breathe. You respond calmly. That's an interesting point. Let's explore that. Now the energy shifts. You didn't escalate. You didn't collapse. You controlled the tone. That control builds authority. People respect the person who can stay steady under pressure. Not the loudest, not the fastest, the steadiest, Creating space also protects you from manipulation. Some people provoke intentionally. They test boundaries. They push buttons to see what they can control. If they can trigger you easily, they own you. If they cannot move you emotionally, they lose leverage. That is why composure is power. But let's be honest. Pausing is uncomfortable. When emotion rises, it feels urgent. It demands expression. It convinces you that if you don't react now, you're weak. That urgency is an illusion. Emotion is a wave. It rises, it peaks, it falls. If you ride it without acting on it, it passes. If you act at the peak, you amplify it. There was a man who once said he trained himself to delay every emotional email by 24 hours. And if he felt angry, he would write the message, but never send it immediately. The next day, he would reread it. Most of the time, he deleted it because the emotion that felt overwhelming in the moment had faded. Time created clarity. You can apply the same principle in smaller ways. Delay your reply. Step away from the room. Lower your voice instead of raising it. Each of these actions reinforces the same message to yourself. I choose how I respond. Over time, this becomes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who just reacts. You begin seeing yourself as someone who stays composed. Identity shapes behavior. If you believe you are calm, you act calmly. If you believe you're impulsive, you act impulsively. So start reinforcing a new identity through small controlled moments. Pause before answering a difficult question. Pause before responding to criticism. Pause before making a decision when emotional. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means allowing emotion to exist without giving it control. There is a critical distinction here. Suppression pushes emotion down. It pretends it isn't there. Regulation acknowledges emotion, but chooses timing. You might still address the issue. You might still set boundaries. You might still disagree strongly. But you do it from steadiness, not from surge. That steadiness communicates confidence. It says, I am not threatened. And when you are not threatened, you think better. Your words become clearer. Your posture becomes relaxed. Your tone becomes measured. All because you trained a few seconds of space. Life will continue to test you. People will continue to say things that challenge you. Situations will continue to surprise you. You cannot control the trigger, but you can control the gap. And inside that gap lives your discipline. Inside that gap lives your power. Inside that gap lives the difference between chaos and control. The more you expand that space, the more unbothered you become. Not because nothing affects you, but because nothing controls you instantly anymore. And that is the beginning of emotional mastery. Chapter 3. Let people misunderstand you. One of the strongest emotional triggers in life is this: being misunderstood. Someone misinterprets your intentions. Someone assumes something about you that isn't true. Someone forms an opinion without knowing the full story. And something inside you tightens. You want to clarify, you want to correct, you want to defend yourself, because misunderstanding feels like injustice. But here is a difficult truth. If you need everyone to understand you in order to stay calm, you will never stay calm. There will always be people who see you through their own lens, their experiences, their biases, their insecurities, their expectations, and you cannot control that lens. Trying to control it will exhaust you. Think about how much energy is spent explaining yourself to people who already decided what they believe. You replay conversations in your head. You craft perfect responses in the shower. You imagine future arguments just to clear your name. All of that consumes mental space, and most of the time it changes nothing. Because misunderstanding is not always about lack of information. Sometimes it's about lack of willingness. Some people do not want clarity. They want confirmation of their narrative. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop chasing approval disguised as explanation. You stop over-explaining your choices. You stop defending your boundaries to people who never respected them. Letting people misunderstand you is uncomfortable. It feels like surrender, but it's actually strength. Because you're choosing peace over ego. There is a quiet confidence in someone who does not rush to correct every assumption. It signals stability. It says, I know who I am. Your opinion does not redefine me. That doesn't mean you never clarify anything. Context matters. Relationships matter. Communication matters. But the key question is this. Am I explaining for clarity, or am I explaining to protect my ego? If it's ego, pause. The need to be understood by everyone is rooted in insecurity. It suggests that your sense of self depends on external validation. True composure comes from internal validation. You know your intentions. You know your effort. You know your integrity. Not everyone else needs to. Imagine someone at work assumes you're distant because you don't talk much. They think you're arrogant, and you could spend weeks trying to change their perception, forcing conversations, over-smiling, oversharing, or you could stay steady. Continue doing your job well. Continue acting with professionalism. Let consistency speak. Over time, the truth reveals itself through behavior. And if it doesn't, you're still at peace. Because you didn't betray your nature to manage someone else's opinion. There is freedom in that. The more you try to manage how everyone sees you, the more fragmented you become. You start adjusting your tone, your personality, your opinions depending on who is watching. That fragmentation leads to anxiety. But when you accept that misunderstanding is inevitable, you relax. You stop performing. You stop scanning the room for reactions. You stop tailoring yourself to avoid judgment. And ironically, like that authenticity often earns more respect. Calm people do not rush to defend their image. They understand something powerful. Reputation is built through patterns, not explanations. If you live consistently aligned with your values, temporary misunderstandings do not threaten you. They pass. Let's go deeper. Why does being misunderstood hurt so much? Because humans are wired for belonging. When someone misjudges you, it feels like exclusion. It feels like a crack in connection. But here is where maturity comes in. Not every connection is meant to be maintained. Not every opinion deserves correction. Not every relationship deserves that level of emotional investment. Part of staying unbothered is learning selective care. Care deeply about what matters. Care less about what doesn't. If someone important to you misunderstands you and is open to conversation, clarify calmly. If someone insignificant misinterprets you and has no impact on your life, let it go. Energy is finite. Spend it wisely. There is also a deeper layer to this. Sometimes we over-explain because we are unsure of our own decisions. If you constantly feel the need to justify yourself, ask, do I fully stand behind this choice? When you are clear internally, external doubt loses intensity. You don't need everyone to agree. You only need alignment with yourself. There was a woman who changed careers later in life. Many people doubted her decision. Some said she was unrealistic. Others said she was irresponsible. At first, she defended herself constantly. She tried to convince everyone that she had a plan. Eventually, she stopped explaining. She focused on learning, on building, on improving. Years later, the same people who questioned her praised her courage. But by then, she no longer needed their validation. She had already built her confidence internally. Letting people misunderstand you requires trust. Trust in your character. Trust in your path. Trust in time. Not every accusation needs a response. Not every rumor needs correction. Not every criticism needs confrontation. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It is discipline. It says, I do not need to argue my existence. When you reach that point, emotional triggers weaken. You are no longer easily disturbed by opinions. You are no longer shaken by assumptions. You are no longer desperate to control perception. You move differently, more grounded, more centered, more unbothered, and that stability becomes magnetic. Because in a world obsessed with image management, the person who is secure enough to let misunderstandings pass stands out. Not loud, not defensive, just steady. And steadiness is power. Chapter 4. Master the Art of Emotional Detachment. Detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word and think it means cold, distant, uncaring, emotionless. But true emotional detachment is none of those things. It is the ability to feel without being ruled. It is the ability to care without clinging. It is the ability to engage without losing yourself. Most people don't suffer because they feel emotions. They suffer because they fuse with them. Anger comes, and they become anger. Jealousy comes, and they become jealousy. Disappointment comes, and they become disappointment. There is no separation. When emotion equals identity, stability disappears. Emotional detachment begins with one simple realization. You are not your emotions. Emotions are experiences passing through you. They are signals, information, waves. But they are not your core. Imagine standing on a beach watching waves hit the shore. Some waves are small, some are powerful, some are chaotic, but the ocean itself remains. You are the ocean. Your emotions are the waves. When you identify with every wave, you're constantly thrown around. When you observe the wave, you remain steady. That is detachment. Let's make this practical. You feel anger rising during a disagreement. Instead of saying, "I am angry," say internally, "Anger is present." That subtle language shift creates psychological distance. "I am angry" feels permanent, personal, identity-based. Anger is present feels temporary, observable, manageable. You are witnessing the emotion instead of becoming it. This skill changes how you experience conflict. Without detachment, conflict feels threatening, personal, emotional. And with detachment, conflict becomes data. You analyze tone, words, context. You ask, what is actually happening here? Not, why am I being attacked? This shift reduces emotional intensity immediately. There is a story of a martial artist who was known for never reacting emotionally during sparring. When asked how he stayed so calm under pressure, he explained, "I don't see the opponent as an enemy. I see movement. I respond to movement." He removed the personal narrative. He didn't think, "He's trying to hurt me." He thought, "There is motion. I will adjust." Emotional detachment works the same way. Instead of thinking, "They disrespected me," you think, "There was a tone I didn't like." Instead of, "They betrayed me," you think, "Their behavior didn't align with my expectation." It sounds subtle, but it transforms the experience. Detachment also protects you from emotional overinvestment. When you attach your happiness to one outcome, one person, one validation, your peace becomes fragile. If it goes well, you're elevated. If it goes wrong, you collapse. Detachment allows you to pursue goals intensely, without attaching your identity to the result. You can want something deeply. You just don't let it define your worth. There is power in wanting without needing. Neediness creates anxiety. Detachment creates calm effort. You try your best, you prepare, you show up fully, and if it doesn't work out, you adjust. Not because you don't care, but because your identity is not on trial. One of the hardest areas to practice detachment is in relationships. When someone withdraws, ignores, or changes behavior, the instinct is to chase clarity, to demand explanation, or to seek reassurance. But chasing intensifies instability. Detachment says, I will communicate once, I will observe, and I will decide accordingly. It replaces desperation with self-respect. It doesn't mean you don't care about the person. It means you care about your emotional stability too. Another form of detachment is detaching from immediate emotional gratification. When you're stressed, you might want to vent instantly. Post something, send a message, make a dramatic decision. Detachment asks you to wait. It asks, will this action help long term? If not, you pause. That pause protects your future self. Emotional detachment is not suppression. Suppression pushes emotion down and pretends it doesn't exist. Detachment acknowledges emotion fully, but chooses when and how to act. You can feel anger and choose calm words. You can feel disappointment and choose constructive action. You can feel hurt and choose dignity. That is mastery. The more you practice detachment, the more stable you become. You stop being dragged into every emotional exchange. You stop absorbing other people's moods. You stop feeling obligated to match energy. Someone raises their voice. You lower yours. Someone reacts dramatically. You stay steady. Someone tries to provoke. You remain composed. That contrast creates authority. Because in a reactive world, the non-reactive person appears powerful. Detachment also improves decision-making. Strong emotions narrow perception. They create tunnel vision. When detached, you see broader patterns. You think longer term. Instead of asking, how do I win this moment? You ask, what outcome serves me best? That perspective prevents impulsive choices. It prevents regret. And most importantly, it builds internal trust. When you know you won't sabotage yourself emotionally, confidence grows. You trust your reactions, you trust your patience, you trust your control. That trust reduces anxiety dramatically. Because anxiety often comes from fearing your own instability. When you master detachment, you no longer fear emotional waves. You know they will pass. You know you can handle them. You know you won't collapse into them. And that knowledge makes you calm. Detachment is not about disconnecting from life. It's about engaging life without losing yourself. You still feel joy. You still feel excitement. You still feel love. But you don't cling. You don't panic. You don't spiral. You remain centered. And that center becomes your anchor when life tests you. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. The goal is to remain bigger than it. When you are bigger than your emotions, nothing external can easily move you. You are no longer tossed by every wave. You stand grounded, present, unbothered. And that is emotional strength in its purest form. Chapter 5. Stop needing closure. From everyone. One of the most underestimated emotional traps in life is the need for closure. You want the explanation. You want the apology. You want the final conversation that makes everything make sense. You want the neat ending. But life rarely gives neat endings. Sometimes people disappear without explanation. Sometimes arguments end without resolution. Sometimes betrayal never comes with confession. And the mind hates unfinished stories. It replays conversations. It imagines alternate endings. It constructs scenarios where justice is served. Because uncertainty feels uncomfortable, and the need for closure feels like control. But here is the truth. When your peace depends on someone else giving you closure, your peace is fragile. Closure is not something others grant you. It is something you decide. Think about how much emotional energy is spent waiting for an apology that may never come. You wait for them to realize what they did. You wait for them to admit fault. You wait for acknowledgement. Meanwhile, your mind is stuck. You're mentally tied to someone who has already moved on. That attachment drains stability. Staying unbothered requires a shift. You stop waiting for others to validate your experience. You validate it yourself. You say, that hurt. That was unfair. That wasn't aligned with my values. And then you decide what to do next. without needing them to agree. Closure is often mistaken for conversation, but real closure is acceptance. Acceptance that it happened. Acceptance that it may never be resolved. Acceptance that you cannot control their awareness. When you reach acceptance, the emotional charge decreases. So you no longer feel the urgency to revisit the past. You release the expectation of repair. This doesn't mean you ignore boundaries. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, you can distance yourself. If someone lies, you can withdraw trust. If someone crosses a line, you can end access. But you don't need a perfect explanation before doing so. You don't need them to understand why. You act from clarity, not from desperation. Let's examine why the need for closure feels so strong. It often connects to ego and identity. If someone leaves without explanation, it can feel like rejection. If someone betrays you, it can feel like humiliation. If someone ends a relationship abruptly, it can feel like you weren't enough. So the mind searches for answers to protect identity. But here's the deeper layer. Even if you receive the explanation, it rarely removes the emotional pain completely. Because the pain wasn't about the explanation, it was about attachment. Attachment to expectation, attachment to a certain outcome, attachment to how things should have unfolded. Detachment, which we discussed earlier, becomes critical here. You can desire clarity, but you don't require it. You can prefer resolution, but you don't depend on it. There is a story about a business partnership that ended abruptly. One partner felt betrayed and demanded answers. The other avoided confrontation and left without much explanation. For months, the first partner obsessed over what went wrong. He replayed conversations. He drafted messages he never sent. He waited for a moment of acknowledgement. Eventually, he realized something powerful. No explanation would change the outcome. Now the partnership was over. The only thing still active was his attachment to the narrative. Once he accepted that, he redirected his energy toward rebuilding, not because he understood everything, but because he stopped waiting. That shift freed him. Closure often becomes an emotional excuse to stay mentally connected. You tell yourself you just need one more conversation, one more text, one more clarification. But what you often need is a decision to move forward, even without all the answers. Life tests you in moments of ambiguity. Can you stay steady without certainty? Can you accept that not everything resolves cleanly? Can you release without a dramatic ending? This is emotional maturity. You stop chasing final chapters written by other people. You write your own continuation. Thus another important layer. Not every situation deserves deep emotional analysis. Sometimes people act from their limitations. Sometimes they lack communication skills. Sometimes they avoid accountability. Understanding that does not require you to fix them. It requires you to adjust your proximity. Distance can be closure. Silence can be closure. Acceptance can be closure. There is strength in saying, I don't need an explanation to move on. Because that statement reflects internal authority. It says your life is not paused waiting for someone else's awareness. When you stop needing closure, you reduce emotional vulnerability dramatically. You no longer chase those who pull away. You no longer beg for clarity from those who refuse to communicate. You no longer stay attached to unresolved endings. You accept, you adapt, you continue. This mindset also prevents overreaction. When someone disappoints you, instead of spiraling into confrontation, you observe patterns. Is this consistent behavior? Is this aligned with what I want around me? Then you decide calmly. You do not demand explanation for every disappointment. You evaluate and adjust. Staying unbothered does not mean you never feel hurt. It means you don't let unresolved situations trap you. It means you don't surrender your future to past confusion. You can acknowledge pain without replaying it. You can learn without obsessing. You can release without revenge. That is closure. Self-created, quiet, final. When you master this, emotional independence grows. You're no longer waiting for apologies to feel worthy. You are no longer waiting for explanations to feel stable. You are no longer waiting for perfect endings to move forward. You decide, and that decision restores power. Life will not always give you neat conclusions, but it will always give you the opportunity to choose your next step. Choose it calmly. Choose it without resentment. Choose it without needing permission, and you will remain unbothered even when the story doesn't end the way you expected. Chapter 6. Become comfortable with discomfort. Most emotional reactions are not caused by the situation itself. They are caused by discomfort. Discomfort of being criticized. Discomfort of being ignored. Discomfort of uncertainty. Discomfort of not being in control. And because discomfort feels unpleasant, the instinct is to eliminate it immediately. You argue to remove tension. You explain to remove misunderstanding. You react to remove pressure. But in doing so, you often create more instability. The ability to stay unbothered depends largely on one's skill, your tolerance for discomfort. If you cannot tolerate discomfort, you will always react. If you can sit inside discomfort without collapsing, you become powerful. Think about physical training. When someone starts lifting weights, the muscle burns, it shakes, it resists. And if they stop the moment discomfort appears, growth never happens. But if they endure the tension briefly, strength develops. Emotional growth works the same way. The discomfort of being misunderstood, the discomfort of silence in an argument, the discomfort of not defending yourself immediately. These moments feel intense, but they are training. When you resist the urge to react, you're building emotional muscle. Let's break this down practically. You are in a conversation. Someone challenges your opinion publicly. Your body reacts first. Heart rate increases. Heat rises in your face. Thoughts speed up. The discomfort screams, "Say something, defend yourself." Now. Instead of reacting, you breathe. You allow the discomfort to exist without acting on it. This feels unnatural at first, but what happens? The discomfort peaks, and then it begins to fade. You realize something important. You survived it. You survived the moment without proving anything. That experience builds internal confidence. Each time you tolerate discomfort without reacting impulsively, you reinforce a new identity. I can handle pressure. And that identity changes your future responses. Many people mistake calm for personality. They think some people are just naturally composed. In reality, composure is trained exposure to discomfort. The calm person has simply practiced sitting in emotional tension long enough that it no longer overwhelms them. There is a concept in psychology called exposure adaptation. When you are repeatedly exposed to something uncomfortable without catastrophic outcome, your nervous system recalibrates. What once felt threatening now feels manageable. You can apply this intentionally. If silence makes you uncomfortable, practice it. In conversations, resist filling every gap. Let pauses breathe. If criticism makes you uncomfortable, practice hearing feedback without defending instantly. Say, "I'll think about that," instead of countering. If uncertainty makes you anxious, practice making decisions without overanalyzing every outcome. Small exposures create resilience. Over time, discomfort stops controlling you. Another area of discomfort is social tension. You might fear awkwardness, rejection, disapproval. So you overcompensate. You overtalk. You over-explain. You over-apologize, all to escape the feeling. But what if you allowed awkwardness to exist? What if you allowed someone to disapprove? What if you allowed tension without rushing to smooth it over? The world does not collapse. Your nervous system may react, but it settles. And with repetition, it settles faster. This is how you become unbothered, not by avoiding difficult situations, but by surviving them calmly. There is also discomfort in growth. When you set boundaries, some people may react negatively. When you become quieter, some may interpret it as distance. When you stop engaging in drama, some may try harder to provoke. That social friction is uncomfortable, but it is also proof that you are changing patterns. Staying unbothered sometimes means tolerating temporary discomfort for long-term peace. You may feel misunderstood. You may feel tension. You may feel the urge to revert to old reactive habits. But if you endure that discomfort, stability becomes your new normal. Discomfort is not danger. It is simply unfamiliarity. Your brain labels unfamiliar emotional states as threat. But when you repeatedly sit with them, they become familiar. And familiarity reduces fear. Another powerful exercise is physical discomfort training. Cold showers, intense workouts, breath control exercises. Why do these help emotionally? Because they teach you to stay calm while your body experiences stress. You learn that discomfort does not equal catastrophe. You learn that you can breathe through intensity. That skill transfers into emotional situations. When someone speaks harshly, it feels like cold water. But instead of flinching, you breathe. Instead of reacting, you regulate. Instead of escalating, you steady yourself. Discomfort becomes manageable. There is a quiet pride in knowing you can handle emotional heat. You don't need to escape it. You don't need to fight it. You can endure it. And endurance creates freedom. Because when discomfort no longer terrifies you, people lose the ability to control you through pressure. They cannot easily provoke you. They cannot easily intimidate you. They cannot easily destabilize you. You become grounded. This doesn't mean you enjoy discomfort. It means you are not threatened by it, and that distinction changes everything. Life will test you through discomfort, delays, criticism, conflict, loss. You cannot eliminate these experiences, but you can expand your capacity to handle them. The more you expand that capacity, the less reactive you become. The less reactive you become, the more unbothered you feel. And the more unbothered you feel, the more powerful you appear. Because true strength is not loud, it is the ability to remain steady when things feel uncomfortable. That steadiness is built in moments where you choose endurance over impulse. And each time you make that choice, your emotional foundation becomes stronger. Stronger than tension. Stronger than pressure. Stronger than discomfort itself. And when discomfort no longer moves you, life's tests lose their intensity. You stay centered, unshaken, unbothered. Chapter 7. Stop needing to win. Every argument. There is a subtle addiction that keeps many people emotionally unstable. The need to win, not just in competition, not just in business, but in conversations. Someone disagrees with you. You feel tension. You prepare your defense. Because losing an argument feels like losing status. It feels like weakness. It feels like surrender. It feels like defeat. But here is the reality. Winning arguments often costs peace. Every time you insist on proving a point, you escalate energy. You tighten posture. You sharpen tone. You narrow your thinking to, how do I defeat this? And in that state, your nervous system is activated. You are not calm. You are competing. There is a difference between standing your ground and fighting for dominance. Many people confuse the two. Standing your ground is quiet, but clear, firm. Fighting for dominance is emotional, defensive, reactive. The unbothered person understands something powerful. Not every disagreement requires engagement. Sometimes the strongest move is strategic disengagement. Let's examine what really happens in arguments. Very few arguments are about facts. Most are about ego. Two people trying to protect identity. Two people trying to assert control. Two people trying to avoid feeling wrong. When you feel the urge to win, ask yourself, what am I protecting right now? Is it truth or is it pride? If it's pride, pause. Pride-driven arguments rarely produce growth. They only produce tension. There's a calm confidence in someone who can say, I see your point, or we can disagree, or even, let's leave it there. That response does not signal weakness. It signals control, because you are choosing not to be pulled into unnecessary emotional exchange. Consider a scenario. A colleague misrepresents your idea in a meeting. You could interrupt sharply and correct them in front of everyone. Or you could wait, respond calmly, and clarify without hostility. Both approaches address the issue, but only one preserves composure. People remember tone more than content. If you maintain steady tone under pressure, you build authority. If you react emotionally, even if you are correct, you weaken perception. Staying unbothered sometimes means accepting that someone else will feel right in the moment, and that is fine. You don't need to correct every narrative immediately. You don't need to dominate every discussion. You don't need the last word. The last word rarely determines long-term respect. Consistency does. Calm does. Composure does. There is also a psychological layer here. When you argue intensely, you reinforce emotional reactivity in your brain. The more you fight, the easier it becomes to fight again. But when you choose restraint, you strengthen emotional regulation. Each restrained reaction builds discipline. Another important truth: you cannot reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Some arguments are not logical. They are emotional attachments disguised as logic. Trying to win those debates drains energy. If someone is committed to misunderstanding you, debating them rarely changes that. Instead, you decide how much energy the situation deserves. You evaluate. Is this discussion productive, or is it escalating for ego? If it's ego, disengage. That does not mean avoiding all conflict. And some conversations require firmness. Some boundaries require clarity, but firmness does not require aggression. You can be direct without being reactive. You can say, I disagree. That doesn't work for me. Let's move forward. Without raising volume, without escalating tone, without internal chaos. This calm directness often disarms others, because emotional escalation requires two participants. If one person remains steady, intensity decreases. There's also wisdom in letting others think they've won. If the outcome does not truly impact your life, why fight? If someone insists on a small detail being correct, and it doesn't matter long-term, let it go. Energy is limited. Spend it where it changes something meaningful. Winning an argument rarely changes your life trajectory. Maintaining emotional stability does. When you release the need to win every exchange, something surprising happens. You become lighter. Conversations feel less like battles. Disagreements feel less threatening. Criticism feels less personal. Because you are no longer viewing interaction as competition, you are viewing it as information exchange. And information does not threaten identity. It informs it. There is strength in quiet certainty. You don't need to shout your correctness. You don't need to dismantle every opposing viewpoint. You know what you stand for. And that is enough. Over time, people notice. They notice that you don't get pulled into drama. They notice that you don't escalate unnecessarily. They notice that your tone remains even. That steadiness builds quiet influence. Ironically, when you stop trying to win, you gain more respect. Because people trust those who are not emotionally volatile. People feel safe around those who do not turn disagreement into war. The unbothered person does not fear being wrong. They see being wrong as growth. They see disagreement as perspective. They see conversation as collaboration, not combat. Life will offer many opportunities to argue. online, at work, in relationships. You can accept every invitation, or you can choose selectively. Ask yourself, does this need my energy? Does this change anything meaningful? Does this align with my long-term stability? If not, step back. Let silence close the exchange. Let maturity override ego. Let calm override impulse. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to win every argument. The goal is to win your emotional control. And sometimes, the way you win that control is by choosing not to fight at all. That choice is power. Quiet, controlled, unbothered. Chapter 8. Protect your energy. Like a leader, your emotional stability is directly connected to one thing: energy. Not time, not intelligence, not even opportunity. Energy. How much of it you have, where you spend it, who you give it to. Most people are not emotionally unstable because life is overwhelming. They are unstable because their energy is scattered. They give attention to every notification, every comment, every disagreement, every piece of drama. And attention is life force. Where attention goes, energy flows. If your attention is constantly pulled outward, your internal state becomes fragile. You wake up calm. Then you check your phone. A message irritates you. A headline frustrates you. A comparison triggers you. Before the day even begins, your energy is leaking. To stay unbothered, you must become selective. Leaders understand this instinctively. They do not respond to everything. They do not attend every debate. They do not involve themselves in unnecessary emotional exchanges. They guard their focus. Because focus fuels clarity, and clarity fuels calm. Imagine your energy as a limited daily budget. Every reaction costs something. Every argument costs something. Every mental replay of a past conversation costs something. If you overspend emotionally in the morning, you are depleted by afternoon. Then small inconveniences feel bigger than they are. Emotional control weakens when energy is low. This is why protecting your energy is foundational. Start by observing where your energy drains most. Is it social media? Is it certain people who constantly complain? Is it internal overthinking? Is it news cycles? Not everything deserves your emotional investment. One of the strongest habits you can build is controlled input. Limit unnecessary exposure. You do not need constant updates. You do not need to read every comment. You do not need to participate in every debate. When you reduce external noise, internal calm increases. Silence is restorative. Another major energy leak is emotional rumination. You replay what someone said. You imagine what you should have said. You rehearse future scenarios that may never happen. All of this consumes mental bandwidth. Ask yourself, is this thought productive? If not, redirect. Not through force, but through focus. Shift to a task. Shift to physical movement. Shift to something tangible. Leaders operate from intentional focus. They allocate attention deliberately. One, they ask, what matters today? Then they protect it. Protecting your energy also means protecting your boundaries. If someone repeatedly disrupts your calm, you adjust proximity. You don't need dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the solution is subtle reduction of access, less exposure, less engagement, less emotional availability. Boundaries preserve energy. Energy preserves composure. Another aspect of energy protection is sleep and physical care. When exhausted, emotional regulation declines. When physically drained, irritability increases. When overstimulated, patience decreases. Taking care of your body is not separate from emotional mastery. It supports it. Calmness requires physiological stability. Breathing practices also play a major role. When stressed, breath shortens. When breath shortens, tension rises. When tension rises, reactions intensify. Slow breathing signals safety to the nervous system. Safety reduces emotional urgency. The unbothered person does not rush internally. They maintain steady rhythm. Protecting energy also involves knowing when not to respond immediately. Just because something is urgent to someone else does not mean it must be urgent to you. Delayed response is often strategic. It allows emotion to settle, it allows clarity to surface, and clarity prevents unnecessary escalation. You do not need to match urgency, you do not need to match intensity, you do not need to match emotional volume. Matching energy is reactive. Maintaining your own energy is leadership. There is also power in solitude. Time alone restores emotional equilibrium. It allows you to process quietly without external influence. In solitude, you reconnect with internal standards instead of external expectations. That reconnection strengthens identity, and identity stabilizes emotion. When you know who you are and what matters, distractions lose intensity. Criticism feels smaller. Drama feels irrelevant. Noise feels distant. Your emotional system becomes less sensitive to external triggers because it is not overloaded. Protecting your energy is not selfish, it is responsible. If you allow constant emotional drain, you become reactive. If you conserve energy, you remain steady. Steadiness builds influence. Influence builds impact. Life will test you through distractions as much as through conflict. Endless stimulation, endless comparison, endless commentary. If you allow all of it inside your mind, stability erodes. But if you filter intentionally, you create internal quiet. And internal quiet is the foundation of being unbothered. You cannot control how loud the world is, but you can control how much of it enters you. Choose carefully. Guard your focus. Protect your emotional bandwidth. Spend energy on growth, on meaningful relationships, on deliberate action, not on impulse reactions. The calmer you become, the more others will project intensity toward you. Because calm can feel threatening to chaotic people. They may try to provoke, they may try to disrupt, but when your energy is protected, you do not absorb it. You observe, you evaluate, you choose. That is leadership, not loud, not aggressive, but composed. When you manage your energy wisely, staying unbothered becomes easier. Because you are no longer emotionally overdrawn, you are stable, centered, in control, and from that place, life's tests lose their power over you. Life will continue to test you, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, through criticism, through misunderstanding, through discomfort, through silence, through unexpected loss. That will not change. What can change is how you meet those tests. Throughout this journey, you have seen something powerful. You do not become unbothered by eliminating problems. You become unbothered by mastering yourself. You learn to stop taking everything personally. You learned to build space between feeling and reaction. You learned to let people misunderstand you. You learned emotional detachment. You learned to create your own closure. You learned to tolerate discomfort. You learned to stop fighting every battle. You learned to protect your energy. Each of these skills builds the same foundation: internal control. When you stop reacting impulsively, you conserve power. When you stop chasing validation, you regain stability. When you stop needing the last word, you build authority. And when you stop letting external events dictate your emotional state, you step into a different version of yourself. A steadier version, a quieter version, a stronger version. Being unbothered does not mean life becomes easy. It means you become grounded. There will still be moments where anger rises, where disappointment hits, where frustration surfaces. But now, you know how to handle it. You pause, you breathe, you observe, you choose. That choice is everything. Most people live in reaction mode. Their mood shifts with every comment. Their confidence shifts with every opinion. Their peace shifts with every inconvenience. You no longer have to live that way. You can walk into tense situations without tightening internally. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can experience uncertainty without spiraling. You can sit in silence without feeling threatened. That level of composure is rare, and rare qualities build powerful lives. The calmest person in the room often has the most control, not because they dominate, but because they are not dominated by their emotions. When you are not easily triggered, people lose leverage over you. When you are not easily offended, opinions lose power over you. When you are not easily shaken, chaos loses influence over you. You begin to move differently, more intentional, more measured, more strategic. And that presence changes how others respond to you. Calm commands respect, not loudness, not aggression, not emotional intensity. Calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you can handle pressure. The kind of calm that comes from understanding that not everything deserves your energy. The kind of calm that is built, not given. But remember this. Emotional mastery is not a one-time decision. It is daily practice. You will still face triggers. You will still feel the urge to react. You will still experience discomfort. The difference now is awareness. You recognize the wave before it carries you away. And with that awareness, you regain control. So here is a simple challenge. For the next 72 hours, practice 3 things. First, pause before reacting. Even if it's just 2 seconds. Second, allow one misunderstanding to exist without correcting it immediately. Third, walk away from one unnecessary argument. Observe how different you feel. Observe how much energy you conserve. Observe how much calmer your mind becomes. Small practices create lasting identity shifts, and over time, you will notice something subtle but powerful. Situations that once triggered you no longer move you as easily. Comments that once bothered you now feel neutral. Silence that once felt uncomfortable now feels stable. You will realize that life still tests you, but it no longer controls you. That is freedom. Not freedom from problems, but freedom from emotional captivity. When you reach that point, you stop chasing external peace. You embody internal peace. And internal peace is unshakable. Carry this with you. Not as motivation, but as discipline. Not as inspiration, but as identity. Become the person who does not react impulsively. Become the person who does not argue unnecessarily. Become the person who does not chase explanations. Become the person who protects their energy. And when life tests you, as it inevitably will, you will remain steady, centered, unbothered. Because the real victory was never about controlling the world. It was about controlling yourself. And that is a power no one can take from you.